Hi, and welcome to More Human, More Resources, the HR podcast for entrepreneurs. I'm Vicki Brown, your host and CEO of Vidamaneo Enterprises. As a serial entrepreneur, I understand that having the right expert help has been critical to my success. That's why I'm dedicated to telling you, in plain language, what's going on in the world of HR that might impact your business and what you need to do about it, with real actionable tips to help you master that list of must-dos and grow your leadership muscle. First things first, the information contained in this podcast is provided for general purposes only and is not to be considered legal advice. Your decision to adopt or not adopt any practice or procedure mentioned in this podcast is solely yours, and we bear no responsibility for the outcome. We urge you to always consult legal counsel and other appropriate licensed professionals. And with that, let's get into the show. You're listening to Season 2, Episode 7. In this week's episode, our question of the day is, my employee has COVID. Now what do I do? You know, dealing with the pandemic is so complicated and fluid that business owners have many times been at a complete loss as to what to do and when to do it. Now, with the clear understanding that things are changing seemingly every day, and there are different guidelines for different places, I'm going to take a stab at giving you the most recent guidelines for and from the County of Los Angeles. Again, keep in mind, this is what's in place here, LA County, and now, December of 2021. As with everything, and particularly this thing, it's always best to check in with counsel to be sure you have the most up-to-date information and instructions. And by the way, if you aren't in LA County, this is still a really good overview that can help you craft the right questions to ask your attorney. Now, on to dealing with COVID in the workplace. Let's talk about mandates. Vaccine mandates, testing mandates, all sorts of mandates. First off, if you have more than 100 employees, you fall under the OSHA requirement to mandate vaccines at your company. Now, I'm not going to focus a lot on this requirement for larger companies. I put a link in the show notes that will give you more details and information. In this episode, I'm going to focus on companies under 100 employees. Okay, so vaccine or testing policies. Are you allowed to have them? Short answer, yes. On the vaccine side, you are allowed to require vaccinations for everyone at your worksite. Now, along with that, you also have to allow for possible accommodation requests based on medical or religious reasons. If your employee asks to be excused from the requirement based on their medical condition or their religious beliefs, you have to consider all the evidence and make a decision as to whether or not you're going to offer them an accommodation. What's an accommodation? Well, it might be weekly testing, or making their job remote only for a period of time, or permanently, or any other compromise that might meet both their needs and those of the business. Now keep in mind, deciding if and how you will accommodate an exemption request is definitely something you should discuss with counsel. You can easily find yourself in a difficult situation. All sorts of pitfalls come to mind. Religious discrimination, the American with Disabilities Act requirements, setting precedents, and treating all employees equally. Yep, it's really a bit of a soup. So, step carefully. What I can say with relative certainty is that if you institute a vaccine mandate without giving the employee the opportunity to request an exemption, you're asking for trouble, and you can pretty much expect the letter from their lawyer. Now, on to testing. Yes, as an employer, you can absolutely mandate something like weekly testing, and that can be as an accommodation to the vaccine mandate, or it can be a standalone, as in everyone has to test every week. Now, as you might guess, there are some restrictions. The tests can't cost the employee anything, meaning if there's a fee for the test, sometimes they're offered free of charge, but sometimes not, then you as the employer have to pay for it. And you also have to pay for the time it takes the employee to go get tested. It's considered work time. There are a lot of ways weekly testing can happen. You can send everyone to a doctor, clinic, or other testing site, or you can contract with a company to come on site and do weekly testing for you. A kind of nice third alternative has developed recently. You can provide in-home rapid tests to the employee for them to use on site. This option eliminates the trouble of going off-site, and the results are usually faster than other options. Can be as little as 15 minutes. But keep in mind, these rapid at-home test kits cost real money. And when you multiply that by the number of employees you have, and that number by the number of weeks you need, the cost can be a real budget buster. While, on the other hand, my local CVS pharmacy has free rapid testing with same-day results. Now sure, it's not really immediate, but it's also free. So, if you're going to go with mandatory weekly testing, carefully explore all your options. Next, what do you do if you have a COVID case at your office? Well, once you know of a confirmed case, immediately isolate that employee. Send them home and keep them there until they're out of the isolation period. Now, the thing that can be a bit tricky here is this applies to a confirmed case. So, when should your spidey sense go off? If someone isn't feeling well and are exhibiting COVID symptoms, they should be sent home and tested right away. Oh, and by the way, although the federal COVID supplemental sick leave law has expired, there are a lot of local ordinances around on the subject. So, check out what's happening in your city, county, or state. And one other point to remember, results of COVID testing is considered protected medical information, so be sure to treat it that way. It's confidential, so don't share. Now, in addition to isolating the person, you have to notify people who have been in close contact. LA County defines close contact as someone who was within 6 feet of the person for a total of 15 minutes or more over a 24-hour period. And it doesn't matter if they were wearing a mask or not. Or someone who had, quote-unquote, unprotected contact with the case's body fluids and/or secretions. In English, that means being coughed or sneezed at, or sharing drink or food or utensils. So, once you determine who may be considered someone who had close contact, you have to notify them of a possible exposure. Again, you have to do this without broadcasting anyone's medical information. So the phrase to keep in mind is, "We have been made aware that you may have been exposed," etc., etc. You need to give them instructions on next steps. And again, in LA County, the next steps are determined by whether they are fully vaccinated or not. If they aren't vaccinated, they have to be restricted from work, instructed to follow isolation guidelines, and you as the employer have to provide no-cost testing for them. Needless to say, the time they use to get tested is also paid time. As to their isolation guidelines, they have to stay home until 10 full days have passed since the last known close contact, provided they never develop symptoms, or 7 full days have passed since close contact, provided they never develop symptoms and they have a negative test result collected on or after day 5 from the day of their last exposure. And even when they do come back to work, they still have to practice social distancing and mask up for a minimum of 14 days after their possible exposure. Now, if they do develop symptoms within 14 days, then they can only return to work if at least 10 days have passed from when their symptoms first started, their symptoms have improved, and they have been fever-free for at least 24 hours without the use of fever-reducing medicine. So they either have to meet all those points or they must have a negative result from a test performed after their symptoms began. At least 10 days must have passed since the last known close contact, and they have been symptom-free for at least 24 hours without medicine. Now, on the other hand, if they are fully vaccinated, or if they recently recovered from the virus, LA County says they can continue to work as long as they don't have any symptoms. If they've been fully vaccinated, testing is recommended, and if they've recently recovered, it's not recommended unless they're symptomatic. And in either case, they should monitor their health for 14 days after the last contact with the infected person. And if they develop symptoms within the 14 days, they have to be restricted from work. So, what about if someone wasn't in close contact, but they have symptoms? Well, if they test and it's negative, They can return to work after they've been fever-free for at least 24 hours, and again, without medicine. But if they don't get tested or cleared by a doctor, then you should assume they are a COVID case and follow those isolation guidelines. Two last things. If your company has 3 or more lab-confirmed cases at the worksite within a 14-day period, then that's considered an outbreak, and a whole host of other requirements apply, including notifying the LA County Department of Health within 48 hours. And don't forget workers' comp. Under certain circumstances, California's Senate Bill 1159 presumes the worker contracted the illness at work, so they would be eligible for workers' compensation. Okay, that's as succinct an overview as I can possibly give. But in reality, it's a good idea for you to read the material and maybe even keep a copy on hand. As employers, we have a lot of responsibilities and requirements around dealing with the pandemic. So check out the links in the show notes. Make sure you have reference material and requirements at hand. You have the proper protocols in place, and you know the contact info for your attorney. We can all get through this, but it's going to take a big lift from each of us. If you found this information helpful, please leave a review and tell a friend. Thanks for spending the time. Until next week, same time, same place.